What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Bridging the Gap here on the Jersey First TV network. As always, I'm AJ Malillo,
I'm Stephen Rombolo.
and we are super excited to have another episode of Bridging the Gap for you. You could still check us out and subscribe on Jersey First TV over on YouTube. You could check us out on jerseyfirst.org. You could sign up for our newsletter, sign up for our signing our pledge to make New Jersey a better place for all of us to live in. And look, I'm excited for another episode. I think we got a fun one. Steve and I are dressed up a little bit. I have some stuff to do after this. I have a big oral argument for school, so that's why I'm dressed up. And I think that Stephen probably saw my video this morning, felt like, oh, he's in a shirt and a tie, so now I got to get a jacket on, and so he threw a
That's
jacket on. And so
that
we're
is
looking good.
exactly what happened. That is exactly what happened.
So what's
So,
up, Steve? How was your week?
you know what? I got a week down at the new job, which has been awesome. I'll tell you what, I did definitely miss the hustle and bustle of working on the Seaside Heights Boardwalk. There is nothing like it. We've been gifted with a beautiful week here in Jersey. We had like a bunch of 80-degree days while it's spring break. So I've been clocking in hours, learning as much as I can, meeting as many people as I can. And it's been awesome. Last week, I think my total hours was like 53 hours I was in. So I didn't really have much time for anything else. Any spare time I had, went to the gym and making sure I could get a solid meal in because it is a grind running a candy shop. You might not think it, but there is a lot that goes on behind the scenes in a business like that.
Sure, running a candy shop in the summer on the Jersey Shore. I think there's a lot that goes into it. On a beautiful week, you're right. We've got these 86-degree days. It's going to be another gorgeous day today. But if you couldn't tell, with this beautiful spring weather, basically summer weather, comes all of the pollination that comes with the lovely allergies
Yes.
that Steve and I are both suffering from. So you're going to have to bear with us a little bit. It's
Yeah,
just that time of year.
it is. And it always hits me like a truck every time. I know it's coming. I know it's going to happen. And I should prepare. But some days you just wake up and there's nothing you could do.
There's only so much you could do about allergies, for real. Like allergy medicine, it does what it can, but it's never gonna stop it all.
No, no. But AJ, let me bounce it back to you. How was your week?
My week was good, man. My week was good. From the beginning of the week, I knew that Friday today, that our record day would be my busiest day of the week. So you know how when you have one particularly busy day in the week, like everything kind of revolves around, well, I have so much to do on that day later in the week.
Yeah, yeah,
So that's kind of what it felt like. And it always sucks when that day is Friday because then you have the entire week to be like, oh, Friday's going to be such a busy day. And and so now we're here. It's Friday. I've made it through and we're going to get out. We're going to get out and it's going to be okay. It's going to be
yeah,
okay.
yeah. You got to listen. You got a beautiful weekend on the horizon. You're about to go deliver an awesome oral argument, which I'm
Sure.
sure has been, a big part of that anticipation for the end of the week. But this is what we do. We show up and we deliver.
That's
We
right.
persevere. We get it to the finish line, and we don't just step over it. We blow through that thing.
Right. Like a guy running a first base, you run straight through the bag. You don't stop. You just run straight through
Exactly.
it. See, I
Exactly.
always said this, Steve, about show business. I said that there's the first rule of show business is to always keep the audience waiting. You got to keep the audience on
Mm,
their toes. But the second rule, to always show up. You just
I
got to
like
show
that.
up. That's
I
like
like that.
rule, you know, it's showbiz, baby. That's all it is. Just got to
I
show up.
like that. That's what we do. Well, we
That's what we
showed up
do.
and we got some good things to talk about.
We do have some good things to talk about, and I'm sure people were looking for our books of the month, and we've kind of pushed it back. We had some stories come up, this, that, and the other thing. But look, we're going to talk about our books briefly today, and then we got a huge story coming out of New Jersey that we're gonna discuss more. So I guess when it comes to our books for last month, do you want to start or do you want me to start? I'll leave it up to you.
I could take it real quick
Sure.
because I was very unimpressed with my book this month, and I have to say, I'm hoping next month I can bounce back and get my hands on a better piece of literature. Again, I read The Death of Expertise by Tom Nichols, the book in question here, and in full honesty and disclosure, every time I read it, I fell asleep after about 20 pages. So it was quite a drag to read, and I didn't even care to finish it. It was one of those books.
Mhm.
I was like, you know what? I've spent the past 180 pages of you listening to the same thing. I'm not going to continue to do that anymore. I think the premise of the book is very interesting. I think a lot of the statistics and studies and little real life anecdotes that he mentions in the book are very useful and they're very helpful. And they further his point, they advance his point, which is that expertise is this sort of devolving thing. There is no standards now to what is an expert. Everybody can be an expert in anything. And it waters down the field and it makes smart people who are really stupid feel like they're smart. But I just summed up his entire book in about 15 seconds. There was a great quote in here that I want to pull up, which, I thought as a little bit interesting. Let's see. He said, oh, here we go. This right here. I highlighted it. I normally don't highlight my books, but I went ahead and I highlighted this one line in the book. He says, quote, Americans now believe that having equal rights in a political system also means that each person's opinion about anything must be accepted as equal to anyone else's. That right there, to me, was the crux of the book, was what I could rely on to have a valuable discussion with you, AJ, and fundamentally what he said about 150 times in a different way, following this. What struck me was that he said, equal rights in a political system means that each person's opinion about anything must be accepted as equal. That to me is, like I said, the crux of his argument here, because his whole argument is that there is expertise in this world, and it takes a long time to become an expert at something. And whether you're an expert at skiing or you're an expert in Colombian domestic policy, right? Like whatever it might be, there are certain ways to build expertise, to build a track record. And he talks about how valuable that process is. Things like the scientific method, peer reviewing any social science articles, right? Those are the things that craft and shape our experts, the people that we turn to when we're seeking a really focused and nuanced and sort of niche understanding of some sort of topic, whatever it might be. His claim is that because everybody has equally as loud of a voice, some people's voices are louder and their expertise is not match the sound of their voice per se, that it leads to these false experts, that these people espouse these falsehoods, and because they have a loud voice, because they're on the same platform, because they have the access to the same information, they are also under the belief that their opinions are expert. And when you don't treat them as so, it creates for poor political discourse. That point, I agree. The premise of this book, I agree. Could he have written this better? 1,000,000%. Could he have condensed this to a 100-page, awesome little synopsis of a really big problem that's going to continue to affect this country and the world for the foreseeable future? Absolutely.
I think that's a
So,
fair criticism. I think, but I don't know. My biggest I guess counterpoint is while I think that expertise is true and there are true experts and there are false experts, and I think that that point is fair enough. I think it doesn't take into account, just basically from what you said, that in the age that we live, anybody can become an expert on anything. You don't have to go to Harvard to become an expert on something. All of that information is available at the fingertips of the person sitting in their mom's basement with Cheeto dust all over their fingers if they put in the time.
and I would agree with you.
So I don't know, this notion of you have to go through a certain way to become an expert, I think is kind of bunk. Like
All
at
right.
one point, true. Today, not so much. Just because somebody didn't spend $150,000 on their education doesn't mean that they're necessarily any less of an expert than the person that did.
So let me offer you this real quick. This is another quote I'm going to pull. These are his definitions. The chapter is called Experts and Citizens, which, again, to me, why would you name it that? Why are we separating these two?
Sounds very Platonic, like
Yeah, right.
Plato-esque.
So he says, put another way, experts are the people who know considerably more on a subject than the rest of us, and are those to whom we turn when we need advice, education, or solutions in a particular area of human knowledge. And then on the next page, he continues to write, every field has its trials by fire, and not everyone survives them, which is why experience and longevity in a particular area of profession are reasonable markers of expertise. Experts stay engaged in their field, continually improve their skills, learn from their mistakes, and have visible track records. And I would agree with you. The guy who's on his computer, whether it be posting on this, Reddit thread or this thread on SCOTUS blog, can have those same credentials that Mr. Nichols uses as the mark of an expert. So on principle, I agree with everything that he says. But when you bring up the point of how accessible education is, of how accessible information is, and how if you just put in the work and you keep showing up, anybody can be an expert on anything. I don't know if I really agree with the premise of his book that it's that dangerous of a thing. So out of all the books I've read this year, probably out of all of the books that I'm going to read this year, this was not what I expected it to be. Quite disappointed. Because like I said, I was just frustrated, disagreeing with, a lot of the stuff he was saying as he was writing it. He made a good point in the beginning, but after that, there was no building
Yeah,
upon
I mean,
it.
the first half, not gonna lie.
No, that's exactly what it was. I read the first chapter and I was like, oh, this guy's onto something. And then the second chapter, and I was like, okay, he hasn't moved on from this. Oh, he's still on this.
Right.
Oh, we're not going anywhere else. That's what it was. I'm giving this a hard 3 out of 10. It wasn't.
That's fair. See, I had a completely counter experience with the book that I read. It's short. Unfortunately, I'm like 20 pages left. I was so busy this month, I should say. There's just a lot going on. So I got like 20 pages left, but that's not because it wasn't good. Like, it was so good. Let's put it this way. It was so good that I slowed myself down reading it because I had so many other things that I had to do. So I had to be like, I can't keep reading this. I had to throw it to the side and come back to it later. So with all of that in the process, I have like 20 pages left. But I read an all-time classic. It's a book that most people should know. And then it is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. And you said you highlighted for the first time. What I tried to do with this book is I was tabbing. I don't know if you could see. I was doing some tabs, and I was kind of liking that. But you know what? I have like two things that I want to kind of talk a little bit about. So this was the I believe the 40th or 60th anniversary edition of the book, and it had this introduction by an author, Neil Gaiman. He's an English author, and basically Fahrenheit 451 is about a dystopian future in which the government, which they don't really get into much of, but it's Brave New World / 1984-esque government that is burning books. You're not allowed to read these old books. You're not allowed to read Shakespeare or the Bible or anything that Western society has sort of used as markers of timeless wisdom, I'll say, so to speak. And the government sort of puts people in television. It makes you feel like you're part of the TV programming that they do, and then they kind of replace your family with the TV. Nobody talks anymore. Nobody has ideas. Nobody comes up with these larger concepts and questions about the human experience because they kind of feed you what they want you to hear. So the main character of the book, his name is Guy how do you pronounce his last name? I feel like as I read it, I pronounce it different every time. So that's Montag, I believe, could be pronouncing it. Guy Montag, and Guy Montag's a fireman, and but in this dystopian future, firemen don't stop fires; they start them. So basically, like, the role of the fireman is to burn down the house where the books are, to prevent people from reading and to destroy these pieces of literature. So anyway, all of that being said, I think the most beautiful, like, sort of synopsis about why ideas are important, why books are important, why words are important is in the introduction by this English author, where he writes, ideas, written ideas, are special. They are the way we transmit our stories and our thoughts from one generation to the next. If we lose them, we lose our shared history. We lose much of what makes us human. And fiction gives us empathy. It puts us inside the minds of other people, gives us the gift of seeing the world through their eyes. Fiction is a lie that tells us true things over and over. And I think that that quote is one of the most beautiful, like one of the most beautiful pieces of writing that I had ever read. I was reading it and I was like just floored. I had to put the book down for a second and been like, that's it. Like that is it right there.
Yeah, that's awesome. That
And
is.
then, yeah, sorry. I'll let
Go ahead.
you. I'll let you speak.
I was gonna say that to me, like as you were reading that and those words were hitting my brain for the first time. It really does make you understand the scope and the importance of like the art of writing, and as something as simple as like written stories from however many hundreds of years ago, right? I think like the first story that was ever written down or recorded was like Beowulf or something like that, right? And we have it to this day, and it's a story that how many millions of human beings across languages and generations and places and all these other circumstances have shared the same story. So I thought that aspect was beautiful, and then the end was like a gut punch when he said, fiction is a lie that tells us truths over and over and over again. That was like, I've never heard that put so beautifully. And as we've discussed on just about every book show that we've done, I am not a big fiction reader. I tend to go for the nonfiction category, but something like that, I don't know, it makes you think. It's kind of got me
I
watering a
would
little bit for a good fiction book.
I would highly recommend this one, Steve. I think that you would really, really like it. I think it's super interesting. I'm also going to read a little bit from, I would say, probably like maybe not the climactic theme or scene in the book, but like right up there with the climactic scene in the book.
Hmm.
And basically, the main character, Guy Montag, is talking with his boss, who's the head of the fire department, Beatty. And Beatty's talking about basically like why books are bad, I guess you could say. And I'm going to jump around a little bit. I'm just going to read from Beatty's quotes because I think they're all so interesting. So he says, now let's take up the minorities in our civilization, shall we? And sorry, I should also point, this also gets into like these concepts of cancel culture, which when this was written was pretty big. You're talking about like McCarthy era cancel culture. So, and now the themes are element again in our modern society. So now take up the minorities in our civilization, shall we? Bigger the population, the more minorities. Don't step on the toes of the dog lovers, the cat lovers, the doctors, lawyers, merchants, chiefs, Mormons, Baptists, Unitarians, second generation Chinese, Swedes, Italians, Germans, Texans, Brooklynites, Irishmen, people from Oregon to Mexico. The people in this book, this play, this TV serial are not meant to represent any actual painters, cartographers, mechanics, anywhere. The bigger your market, Montag, the less you handle controversy. Remember that. All the minor minorities with their navels to be kept clean. Authors full of evil thoughts. Lock up your typewriters. They did. Magazines became a nice blend of vanilla tapioca. Books, so the damn snobbish critics said, were dishwasher. No wonder books stopped selling, the critics said. But the public, knowing what it wanted, spinning happily, let the comic books survive. And the three-dimensional sex magazines, of course. There you have it, Montag. It didn't come from the government down. No. There was a there was no dictum, no declaration, no censorship to start with. No. Technology, mass exploitation, and minor pressure carried the trick, thank God. Today, thanks to them, you can stay happy all the time. You are allowed to read comics, the good old confessions, or trade journals. And then moving on says, you must understand that our civilization is so vast that we can't have our minorities upset and stirred. Ask yourself, what do we want in this country above all? People want to be happy. Isn't that right? Haven't you heard it all your life? I want to be happy, people say. Well, aren't they? Don't we keep them moving? Don't we give them fun? That's all we live for, isn't it? For pleasure? For titillation? And you must admit, our culture provides plenty of these. And in the last little section, luckily, queer ones like her don't happen often. They're just talking about a girl that was in the neighborhood that was like asking all of these questions and whatnot. She says, we know how to nip most of them in the bud early. You can't build a house without nails and wood. If you don't want a house built, hide the nails and wood. If you don't want a man unhappy politically, don't give him two sides to a question to worry him. Give him one. Better yet, give him none. Let him forget there is such a thing as war. If the government is inefficient, top heavy, and tax mad, better it be all those than people worry over it. Peace, Montague. Give the people contests they win by remembering the words to more popular songs or the names of state capitals or how much corn Iowa grew last year. Cram them full of non combustible data. Chock them so damn full of facts they feel stuffed but absolutely brilliant with information. Then they'll feel they're thinking. They'll get a sense of motion without moving, and they'll be happy because facts of that sort don't change. Don't give them any slippery stuff like philosophy or sociology to tie things up with. That way lies melancholy. Any man who can take a TV wall apart and put it back together again, and most men can nowadays, is happier than any man who tries to slide, rule, measure, and equate the universe, which just won't be measured or equated without making man feel bestial and lonely. I know. I've tried it. To hell with it. So bring on the clubs and parties and acrobats and musicians, your daredevils, jets, cars, motorcycles, helicopters, your sex and heroin, more of everything to do with automatic reflex. If the drama is bad, if the film says nothing, if the play is hollow, sting me with the theremin loudly. I'll think I'm responding to the play when it's only a tactile reaction to vibration. But I don't care. I just like solid entertainment. I think it's brilliant. I think
Wow.
it's so brilliant. Just this concept of we will just give them these simple pleasures, these things that they don't have to think about because they're not deep. They don't mean anything. They're very surface level. And it's like how in Brave New World, we give them the drugs, we give them all of these things, and they're happy because they don't have to question anything. And we could do whatever we want to them because they don't even have the capacity to ask the questions. It's a brilliant piece of literature.
That kind of moved me to my core. Um, and just when I thought it got good and couldn't get any better, it did. That I think there's a common theme in all the books you've been reading. If I can recount correctly, we did what 1984.
So I did 1984 last year actually. I did Brave New World.
Oh,
I did Fahrenheit 451, and then I'm blanking on what my first book was this year. But those two, and they're very similar. And then I also read pieces of Dostoevsky's Notes from an Underground
oh
last
yeah, there you go, there you go.
which I still
So
have
that
in my book bag. It's
yeah,
primo literature.
yeah. I mean, listen. So I'll say definitely a book that I need to read. I guess it's never come across my desk. Like we had said, I not a fiction guy, but that was quite the startup to get somebody, feet wet, kind of a taste of what that's like. I think everything that he said is true, and it's a common theme in in modern day, like you said, like in that beginning part where he was talking about sort of catering and there's all these different kinds of people and all these things and just feed them and feed them and feed them and make them feel full, but it's really nothing, and sort of these empty platitudes. Just the appearance of satisfaction, the appearance of participation goes such a far way. And I think it's a really scary and damning lesson that a lot of people should take a look at and learn. And I don't know if that sounds like you. You gotta fix that a little bit. I don't know.
Well, I mean, the idea in politics, don't give them two choices, don't give them one choice, give them no
Give them
choices,
none.
right? And I think that's something that you can kind of like see on the horizon, where it's like everybody's kind of just saying the same thing in a different way. I
Hmm.
think that um, the other point is just this concept of like, and it goes to your book too. You just fill them with facts. Like everybody can just throw out statistics and facts that don't change, that are there, that are clear. And what do they really even know anything? What are they even actually saying? It's like this false expertise because you could just say a
Hmm.
bunch of facts. And it's like, I'm as guilty of that as anybody. I love a good
Oh
game of
yeah.
Jeopardy. I love a good, oh, have you heard this before? Like throw a fact out there. But it's so true. It's like, do you know anything? No, I don't think you really know anything if you could just list off a bunch of facts. Like, that's cool. But, like, tell me something about life.
Yeah, I agree. And to that point, as two individuals who dabble in by virtue of what it is that we do and what we have done, that dabble in the philosophy and those sociology questions. When you're reading a Dostoevsky, when you're reading this right here, what I have a copy of Meditations. Like when you're reading these big, grandiose thoughts, there's nothing quantifiable about
No
anything
citation.
that exactly. There's nothing quantifiable about what Marcus Aurelius wrote, however many hundreds of years ago. There's nothing quantifiable about Dostoevsky or Plato or any of these guys. It's questions. It's actual thought. It's thought provoking. It's something that grabs you. And to me, and the reason that I'm here right now for so many years, grabs you by the soul and sucks you in and makes you look at yourself, other people, the world, and everything that you know around you. And if you're in a position like those gentlemen in 451, I could see why that might be a problem.
Sure, sure. And I think that the point that you just made goes well, and we could tie it into our next story because we are only going to have a couple minutes to cover it. But our next story is dealing with one of the biggest institutions in the state of New Jersey, and an institution of higher learning, an institution where places where these questions and these thoughts should be discussed and answered, and you need to facilitate that type of environment in order for this to happen. And that's what college should be. That's what a liberal education, small L, should be. It's forcing these types of questions and these types of discussions to be had. And one of the biggest liberal universities, small L, in the state of New Jersey is Rutgers University. It's our biggest state school. And if you don't know this story, the professors over at Rutgers, along with full time faculty, graduate workers, postdoctoral researchers, and adjunct faculty, are striking. And they have been for I believe it's been all week. It's been 5 days now. And at the time we're
Hmm.
recording this, and Phil Murphy has gotten involved in these negotiations. And let's give you like the big synopsis. So basically, this is from the Washington Post. The academic workers at Rutgers, including faculty and postdoctoral associates, went on strike Monday with their unions calling it the first in the school's nearly 257-year history. Workers have been asked to join the picket lines and suspend classes and research work. The vote to strike came after the unions, representing nearly 9,000 workers across three campuses, said Sunday that they failed to reach an agreement with the administration for nearly a year of bargaining for a new contract. The unions have been fighting for salary increases in line with inflation, more job security, including longer contracts and for untenured faculty, living wages for teaching assistants, and race and gender equity initiatives, among other demands. The university president, Jonathan uh, Holloway, called the decision deeply disappointing, saying negotiations had been constant and continuous this week. And he said a mediator was appointed to help the two sides reach an agreement. Now, there are some issues with that mediator that was appointed for the side of the employees because the teacher the mediator that was appointed was a former member of the Christie administration. I'm scrolling through here. David Cohen, who was his former head of relations, and David Cohen was a was like a big part in Christie fighting the teachers unions in the state. So they felt like, sure, you got this head negotiator, but he's on your side of this issue. So how good can this mediator really be? Um, and then Jonathan Holloway, who has a long history of working in things like African American studies, got a long, not a very long, but a letter from a large group of people, an open letter from the, sorry, I'm looking for the title of this. It wasn't on the actual letterhead, but a long letter from a group of people that were basically saying that this is attacking predominantly minorities and African Americans and other intersectional organizations. And you had some pretty prominent figures in this movement, including like Ibram X. Kennedy sign on to this letter and a bunch of people and scholars from across the country. So all of this has led to Phil Murphy to get involved, and he said that there's going to be a sit down and they're going to have a discussion about these negotiations. And classes at Rutgers supposedly are supposed to go on as scheduled, but a lot of them have been canceled. Some of them are still going on. So the students are suffering here, the ones paying the tuition for all of these for all of the people involved, the administrators and the teachers. So the students' education suffers, and I don't know, they're college kids. They probably don't mind if a class is canceled here or there, but it still is a detriment to their education. And so I'm not sure how this will play out, but I will say this. Rutgers has a lot of money in endowments. Rutgers gets a lot of money from the state of New Jersey. And maybe, just maybe, if they didn't pay their not great football team loads and loads of money, or their pretty good basketball team loads and loads of money, or I don't know, hire, as every university does, random administrators like associate deans have left to shoe tying, they would have a little bit more money to give the people that actually, in my experience as a current person in higher education, as a person who's been in higher education now for 6 years, the people that actually make a difference, the professors, give them a more appropriate wage. I would rather have good, high quality professors teaching me than some random administrator that I've never seen before doing something that I don't even know why they're there to do.
I couldn't agree more with the last part of exactly what you said. Teachers make all the difference. That is the case whether you're in pre-K or whether you're going to law school, right? That is a universal truth, in my opinion. I understand that to be as true as anything could be. What I think is so interesting about this strike is, first of all, this is in Rutgers 200 and something 70 years of existence, the first strike that they've, ever had. Educators are, sort of putting their foot down. But I was reading through, and I think that there are some really valid claims. So first of all, it's been 284 days between when these negotiations stopped and when the idea of this strike, finally came to fruition. So the educators were sitting there holding their breath for, like you had said, almost a full year, waiting for some sort of back and forth, and they just kind of fizzled out and stalled. You're dealing with one of the things that I thought was so interesting was adjunct professors every semester at Rutgers have to sort of go through the reapplication process and make sure that they're still eligible to teach and can get these classes and are taken on board by the university. There's zero security in that. There is zero job security in that because, like you said, Rutgers would rather turn around and give their, Big Ten football team millions of dollars and maybe cut the professor who changed a kid's life, with the way that he taught a class or the connections that he made for them or whatever it might be. Another thing that I thought was so interesting about this, like you said, Phil Murphy had gotten involved. During this meeting, the primary meeting, he had mentioned the potential use of state money to sort of quell this strike. And you know what that sounds to me like? Sounds like Governor Murphy wants to bail out educators, or bail out Rutgers from having to actually give educators what they want. And if we're going to start bailing out higher education facilities where they already prey on students and charge them outrageous prices for tuition because they know that the government's going to give these kids these money and they're going to get paid no matter what happens to the kid. If we tell those people it's okay, we can give you some money to bridge these gaps between, your employers, educators, and just cover costs if things get shaky and you don't want to cave in to the people that actually do the groundwork in your classrooms and change kids' lives. We'll do that. Hell no, Phil Murphy. We are not going to do that. We are not going to bail out a university. We should encourage a conversation with a, probably more neutral mediator between these two parties so they can reach a resolution that's good for the educators, that's good for the kids, and that probably is not going to be good for Rutgers. But you're talking about 3 unions that represent over 9,000 staff. That's a loud voice. That is one collectively very loud voice, and it's hard to ignore. And for 275 years, educators at Rutgers have never taken a stand like this. So I think it says something that they've reached this point, and I think it says something that there's so much resistance against it. I think it means that they have a good point, and I would say Rutgers needs to come to the table. They have the money, they have the facilities, they have the name. Do something about it, because like you said, the kids are suffering. We're how many weeks away from graduation? Are these kids that are in their final year getting the credits that they need? Are they finishing those projects? Are those kids going to be able to write their thesis, or is their teacher too busy feeling like they're not getting paid enough for the work that they do? There's so many people that are suffering here.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And I think that I think that your point of this basically being a bailout for these poorly run administrations for these universities is pretty much dead on. And it's just going to turn around and bite who? Like it does every single time, the taxpayer of New Jersey. Because like you said, tuition rates are still going to go up, right? All of Rutgers is still going to make the money that they're going to make. The problem is no, you make an obscene amount of money. Universities make an obscene amount of money. Spend it correctly. Look, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like the football team isn't important to the brand of Rutgers. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like they don't drive in a lot of revenue. Of course they do. I'm not going to pretend that the football coach doesn't have, a big sway in this. Obviously it does, but the professors, the reason that you are an institution is because of professors and the research that's coming out of your place. And that also gets people in and puts a lot of butts in seats because they know they're going to get a good quality education from good quality professors. Nobody in the history of the world, I'm pretty sure I can confidently say, I want to go here because I think that they have really great administrators and they have a lot of them. No, nobody's saying that because guess who's not teaching you? The administrators. Guess who you can't name? An administrator. Guess who I can name almost every single one that I've had? Professors. Especially really good professors that made a difference. I can probably name to you off the top of my head like 3 administrators in my life and most in my higher education, I should say. And most of those administrators, I can name them because they did something that bothered me. And they're the ones that make a ton of money, and it doesn't make any sense to me.
I completely agree with you. I could go probably first grade all the way through my last course at Montclair State and tell you just about every teacher I've ever had. I could tell you the names of 2 administrators, my superintendent from Toms River who went to jail, and the former president of Montclair State, who you and I have both, had our discussions about in times through, who's, again, like you said, exactly what an administrator should be, or is, not should be.
And the other thing is that guess what? There's never a lot of negotiations when it's time for the president to get his pay raise.
Yeah.
It doesn't take much negotiation to give you your golden parachute so that if you take a year sabbatical, you can still get paid your millions of dollars. Like that's not an issue ever. Nobody's ever really fighting that one.
No,
I don't know. It's just it's ridiculous because the people on the other side of this negotiation never have the problem. They make as much money as they want. There's no questions asked. But the people that are actually putting in the work aren't making that money. And I think it's a struggle that you're seeing across. Now, there are legal questions about how legal it is because these are technically public employees and how legal it is for them to strike. Those questions are there. People come on either side of that. I don't think it's worthy to delve in. But look, at the end of the day, the money is there. And I would rather see Rutgers, Rutgers admin take a pay cut, and Rutgers firing some admin, and Rutgers, maybe not putting a new artificial turf on the football field or something like that. And I'd rather see them give their employees, a good wage, especially the people that are actually in there making a difference in the kids' lives that are going to school. That's
I
just
couldn't
me.
agree more. I couldn't
All right,
agree
look,
more.
I think that's a good place to end then. If Steve and I are in agreement, I feel like that's always a good spot to stop. Before too long, we'll start disagreeing. So let's call it there. If you are interested in more content, you can subscribe over on Jersey First TV at YouTube. You can check us out at jerseyfirst.org. It's another episode of Bridging the Gap. We'll be back next week with more. I'm AJ Malilla.
I'm Steven Rambola, and before we go, I forgot to talk about the book that I'm going to read next month. I have it right next to me. Can I show it super fast?
Yes.
I'm going to read Atomic Habits,
Oh, I
which
heard
is
this
one of
one's really
those.
good.
Yes. So tiny changes, remarkable results. Another nonfiction sort of philosophy, get your life right book. I'm very excited. It's a short one, over 4 million copies sold. So I'm very much so looking forward to it.
I will be reading The Stranger by Albert Camus. I don't have it with me, but it is a nice short book, and I've heard great things about its philosophical
He's one of my favorite
ideas.
philosophers ever. You're in
So
for a
I'm
treat.
very excited for that. And yeah, we'll talk about that soon. See you, everybody.
Amazing.